that all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Hey guys, welcome back. This is going to be a really important podcast. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one. I have with me Joe Gamaldi. He is the president of the Houston Police Officers Union. In 2019, he was elected as the VP of the Fraternal Order of Police. He was also at the NYPD before coming to Houston, where all good people come, and back in 2008. So you came from New Jersey, right, Joe?
I did not come from New Jersey. That's
Okay.
a dirty rumor that Congressman Crenshaw is trying to spread here.
All right, where are you from?
Born and raised in New York.
Yeah, got a weird Texas accent.
It's kind of a hybrid at this point.
Is it?
Oh, yeah, it's a little bit of a hybrid. When I talk to folks from New York, they say, well, now you got a little bit of both to go in there. And of course, I throw the y'all out there to make people feel more comfortable.
Yeah, that's all you got to do.
Yeah.
Houston, Houston's a huge mix of people anyway. Hey, welcome to the show. It's good to have you on. We got some important topics to hit. So kind of want to make sure I get all your bio. So you were at NYPD, then you came to Houston PD, and then you became the union head. When did you become the head of the union here?
So I became the president about 2.5 years ago after spending 5 years as the vice president. But yeah, I started my career in the NYPD, did 3 years there. I was tired of living in a shoebox apartment, the type that's so small when you open your bedroom door, it hits your bed. So finally, I wanted something different for my life and moved down to Houston. It was the best decision I ever made. Better quality of life, cheaper cost of living.
Texan by choice.
I love this city. It's the type of place where you can literally come here with nothing, as I did, just a car full of clothes. And as long as you're willing to work hard, doesn't matter who your dad is, who your mom is, what connections you have. As long as you're willing to work hard, you can accomplish a lot.
It's America, man.
Yep.
And America's going through a hard time right now. And the police are at the center of this hard time. Police morale, I'm sure, is low. Crime in America is skyrocketing. I think just in Houston, you give me some numbers. So I'm going to start out with a bunch of these numbers just to give everybody some context about what we're going to be talking about. We'll probably go back to some of these stats. But here in Houston, murder is up 40% this year over last. That's 45 more people murdered than last. Aggravated assaults up 25%, violent crime overall 10%. I'm sure it's still down since like the 90s. We've had a huge decrease in crime, and maybe we should talk about why that is in a little bit. It's also important to know, officer-involved shootings. You sent me these numbers, and these are just all shootings. It doesn't distinguish between armed and unarmed people. 2017, 15, 2018, 18 shootings, 2019, 21, 2020, just 9 so far, trending to still be under 20. So pretty consistently under 20 officer-involved shootings in the city of Houston. And how many people do we have here? Like 4 million. There's an average 2 million documented encounters between police and the public every year. Last year, you guys got 276 complaints from citizens on our officers. Depending on how you look at that, you could say that's a ton or very little, but there's 2 million documented interactions. And so, you can take it with what you will. Officer on officer internal affairs complaints over 850. So you guys are a bunch of tattletales. But you complain on each other 3-1 over citizens. I've heard that to be the case in a lot of precincts, not just Houston. I keep hearing that. And so let's go through some more numbers. Violence against police officers in 2019 nationwide, we had 293 officers, being officers shot, roughly 1 every 29 hours. That was over a 20% increase from 2018. In 2020 so far, we've seen 144 officers shot. I don't know if that's changed since you sent me this email like just a few days ago, but let's say it's 144, on pace to be basically as last year. So how is morale in the police force right now?
Well, I can tell you right now, this is no secret to anybody that's a police officer. I've been one for 15 years. This is the worst I've ever seen it. Morale is completely in the tank. I'll give you some perspective. Last year, law enforcement applications were down 63% in this country.
Wow.
63%. What do you think those numbers are going to look like this year? After we've had the wave of anti-police rhetoric that has gone on since the George Floyd incident, our officers are basically saying, I'm looking for another job. We actually had an officer on the skirmish line. As soon as it was completed, he went to his sergeant and said, I'm done. He goes, well, no, we still got a few more hours in your shift. He goes, no, you don't understand. I'm done, meaning I quit. And he walked off the line. Those are the type of decisions that these folks are making. I was going to call them kids because that's what they are. They're in their early 20s. They're racially diverse.
What is the racial diversity of Houston PD?
Yeah, so we're actually a majority-minority department. We're about 40% white, 29% Hispanic, 21% black, 7 to 8% Asian, and the rest is just a mix. But we reflect the community that we serve. We look like our community. And not every department's like that, but most big city departments that you'll see are like that. But we have these young officers that are the best trained that we've ever had, the best educated that we've ever had, the most diverse, and they're the ones that are getting screamed at on the front line and getting the absolute worst of humanity thrown at them. Yeah. I mean, they're screaming racial epithets at them. They're calling them every name in the book. And I'll be honest, too, our minority officers get it worse than our white officers on the skirmish line.
What is it like when these white Marxists, and there's a lot, I don't know that we saw a whole lot of them here in Houston. This isn't like a Antifa breeding ground, thank goodness. But you see it across the country. Do you hear from these I've seen pictures of a black officer trying to hold the line and these white people just screaming at him that he's a racist. Like, what the heck is going on?
Well, it's completely ridiculous. And then you hear folks from the tolerant left are calling everybody a racist. And it's like, you are the ones screaming in these officers' faces, who, by the way, are there to protect their right to protest the police. They're out there putting their lives on the line to make sure that these folks can have a right to protest. And then you're yelling every obscenity in the world at them. It's completely ridiculous. And one of the things I brought up, and this wasn't just for these protests, I've brought this up for mask protests or any other protest. Everybody has their right to protest in this country. It's a fundamental right that we have, and we respect it and we support it. Where does it say that you get to scream in another human being's face and call them the worst names imaginable? Where does it say that you get to assault them? Where does it say that you get to throw a brick at them? And we need to get some sort of semblance of normalcy back to the country where, yes, you can protest, but there's also a very firm line in the sand about what you can and cannot do to our police officers. And the whole thing's gotten out of hand.
No, and it's obvious why morale is low. And I'm always I'm still curious about how minority police officers feel about all this, because when they take off the uniform, do they feel like there's something to this story, that they're more likely to get pulled over even though they're not doing anything? Do they talk to you about that? I mean, is there some semblance of truth to it? Like, what's the...
I think it depends on the individual officer and his or her own personal experiences. But something I try to do to be a bit more empathetic to folks is when I see something that happens in our community or any other community where the suspect may be black, I'll call black officers that I'm friends with and say, what was your take on this? And I think that can go really a long way when you talk about anything, if you're willing to take yourself out of your shoes and put yourself into someone else's shoes and say, do you really think that this was racially motivated? Do you think this was just a bad cop who would have done that, whether the person was white, black, Hispanic, etc.? But I think it goes a long way to trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
And to that story, which is, because the argument is that police target minority communities, the black community specifically. And then, so the question is just, is it true? And because they'll argue that, proportionally speaking, based on what their proportion is of the population, police interactions with the black community are far greater. Of course, does that mean they're being targeted? Does that mean it's a racist issue, or what else is going on here?
Well, let me give you a little statistical data first. So there was a study done by University of Maryland, Michigan State University, and this is academia talking, this is not the police world talking, back in 2015, where they studied every single fatal police shooting. And what they found was that there was absolutely no racial bias in the shootings. And that in over 99% of the cases, the suspect was armed with a weapon when they were shot by the police. Yeah. So what it really drilled down on and what was important for people to take from that study is they said, wherever there is violent crime, whatever the predominant race of that area is where there is the violent crime, is who the police officers will end up shooting. And if you really just break it down and think about it, it makes complete sense. Violent communities, that someone is using a gun in that community is more likely to be shot by a police officer. So what we really need to talk about if we want to reduce officer-involved shootings is we need to reduce violence in our communities. And that will yield less police-involved shootings.
Yeah.
But when you start talking about how are we going to reduce violence in our communities, we need to start having a much bigger conversation about, are there educational opportunities? Are there job opportunities?
Right.
Is there a path forward for people in those communities? Because without those things...
those are too solutions oriented.
Well, and it also then acknowledges that maybe the leaders of some of these areas, a lot of these inner cities would have to acknowledge that what they've been doing over the last 30, 40, 50 years has been an abject failure, and that there needs to be a rethinking about how they're handling things.
Right. I mean, police follow criminal violence, and you've been at NYPD. They're a highly data-driven police force, probably much more so than even when you were back there. I know just because I have friends who are up there. Before all this happened, it didn't seem to me that Houston had really bad relations with the community. It's not something I hear about as a representative. Not to say that there's not problems. It's not something that's brought up to me often. What's your take? And I would also add, George Floyd is from here. We had a huge march, and it was peaceful and I think really well done. So, I mean, we got to be doing something right in Houston. We had one bad night of protests where people really took advantage. But other than that, I mean, we just have not seen what other cities have seen.
Yeah, I think we have a fantastic relationship with our community, but that takes a lot of work. We're out there every single day. We're out there every single day building bridges with our community. We're very involved in church. I actually meet with a group of black preachers once a month to just kind of go over any issues that there may be in the community. They can tell me about the things that they're seeing. And of course, the department is very engaged with the community. We try to be out there as much as possible, and we try to build those bridges.
Is that what nobody ever defines community policing? It just means talking to people, right? Is that community policing?
Community policing is talking to people, figuring out what problems in the community that we can provide solutions to. But I think really good community policing is just providing good service. That's what it really boils down to. One of the things that harms us a bit is we're so understaffed. We're anywhere from 12 to 1,500 police officers short in the city of Houston. So I don't care how nice I am or how community oriented I am. When your house gets broken into, you're not happy that it took me 4 hours to get there. Yeah. So one of the things that we struggle with is we're so understaffed that we still try to provide that level of service. Or, the 18-year-old who gets in a car accident, it's the worst day of their life, but it still takes us 2 hours to get there, and that poor person's crying out there. Yeah. They want a police officer when they want them there. But to your point about, we go where the crime is. And I don't think that's acknowledged enough by folks.
Right. There's a 911 call. Like, what are you supposed to ignore it?
Exactly. We're going there. And we also do studies every single year to figure out where are our crime patterns, where are all the calls coming from, and that's where we will adjust our staffing accordingly to make sure that we have more officers in that area. So no matter which neighborhood it is, whether it's a black neighborhood, Hispanic neighborhood, white neighborhood, mixed neighborhood, whatever, if that's where the crime is, if that's where the calls are, that's where you're going to see a high concentration of police officers, and that's where you're going to see a high concentration of people stopped because we're attempting to be proactive about crime in your neighborhood. Right. So yes, we may be doing more traffic stops, or we may be stopping people that we believe we have reasonable suspicion to stop because we're trying to prevent crime, but we have to have a conversation. Is that still what the community wants from us?
Right.
And at some point, as we move forward with this conversation, the community and politicians are going to have to decide, what do you want from police officers? Do you not want us enforcing drug crimes? Well, then fine, you'll have to change the law. Do you not want us to chase after people that have a gun? Well, fine, tell us. Now, I'll tell you, you're not going to like the results of that. The crime in your neighborhood is going to go up as we do not enforce quality of life offenses and we're not enforcing drug laws. But if that's what you want, tell us and we will do it. But this halfway of, hey, we kind of want you to enforce that stuff, but we don't really like when it goes awry when you are enforcing it, that's not going to work and you're throwing us under the bus in the process.
Yeah, because when some people hear proactive policing, they might hear targeting. And, I get that, but also reactive policing just means responding to when things got really, really bad. When somebody's calling 911 and begging you to come save them. I mean, from what I've heard, a lot of that results in an exhausted police force that's always running headfirst into a crazy situation that, I think more people need to experience. And I have a bit of experience with running into chaos.
Maybe just a little bit.
Yeah, but nothing like police do, frankly. I mean, overseas it's a little bit more clear cut. Now we deal with a lot of civilians too, and you've got to treat them with respect. And so it does, and especially in Iraq, Afghanistan, you can't tell the difference between, and you don't know when they're going to pull out an AK from under what they're holding. They look very peaceful and docile, and then all of a sudden they don't. And here's why it's harder for police, I think, because it's your own community. And it's your own fellow Americans. And and your governing structures are much stricter. Just we care about civil rights in this country. We care about all these things, and I think cops do the best that they can to enforce that. But it's just harder. I think it's a harder job, and you're also expected to do so many other jobs like a social worker because you know. Sorry, I'm just gonna keep rambling for a second.
No. Go ahead. You're vibing right now.
It's why it's so problematic to see shows like Cops and Live PD canceled because.
Don't forget about Paw Patrol. They wanted to cancel Paw Patrol too.
You should cancel Paw Patrol.
My daughters love Paw Patrol.
I'm just kidding. So I have never seen these shows as glamorizing police work. There's some other TV shows that maybe seem to glamorize police work, but not these shows. These are the ones that show you what you really deal with. People are screaming at you. You're like, whoa, what did I just walk into? And I don't know. I think regular people just need to experience that a little bit more, see how difficult that situation. It doesn't excuse a lot of things. It certainly doesn't excuse the George Floyd killing. I think the reason that enraged so many people is because it was so obviously wrong and pretty sick. But, the question is that normal? And are we taking a contextual view of the whole thing?
Yeah, the George Floyd, obviously everybody agreed that was abhorrent. And we all came out and completely just said, this is not what we do. This is not what police officers do. And the justice system is taking its course. And I expect that justice will be swift. But, cancel culture came for police officers. And we had to cancel Live PD and Cops. And what those shows really did was it gave every single citizen sitting at home on their couch a window into what we deal with every single day. Because, I think most people... When I tell, when you talked about the statistics of, hey, we shot 21 people last year, I think most people would think that number should be in the hundreds based on how much they hear about officer-involved shootings. And a lot of the time it might just be mundane. Like you said, you show up at a call and people are screaming in your face or you're trying to mitigate whatever situation's going on. But the fact is the community and, to an extent, politicians have asked too much from police officers. They want us to be social workers. They want us to help raise kids. They want us to do all these types of things. And listen, we'll take that burden. If that's what you need us to do because we're police officers, this is what we signed up for. But now you're throwing us under the bus at every opportunity that you get. You're not respecting the job that we do. You're not respecting the challenges of the split-second decisions that our officers need to make. And if you want other people to handle some of this stuff, we're happy to share the load. So if you want social workers going out to mental health calls and homeless calls or mental health professionals, we're supportive of that. But what people want to do is, well, we need to take funding away from police officers in order to pay for that. And that's
is that when you go to community meetings, is that really what people are asking for, especially in high crime neighborhoods?
No, not at all. In the communities that I go to and the folks I speak with, they don't want less police. They want more police officers because they want to feel safe. They want us to be able to get there quickly.
Where is their voice in all of this? I mean, it's not fair to them. Because I bet you guys can track a certain. I've heard this in many cities. There's basically I've heard it from my NYPD friends. They're like, there's about 1,000 people in the entire city that keep committing crimes. It's not everybody. It's a very small segment of the population.
So now you're gonna get me on my soapbox.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. There is a very small percentage of people that is responsible for a large majority of the crime in our city. But over the last few years, we have decided to embrace a revolving door strategy, thanks to our current DA, District Attorney Kim Ogg, and thanks to our current judges that are in power. We've embraced bail reform, which has essentially allowed people out over and over and over again. I'm talking people that are out on 8 felony bonds, which means they've committed 8 individual felonies and been continually let out. We're talking about violent, repeat, gun-toting felons.
Not just some 18-year-old with some weed in his pocket.
No, and you know what? We actually support bail reform for things like that, or the single mother who's driving with a suspended license who's never been arrested before. There's no reason why she should be held on a bond. Our old system was archaic, it was draconian, and it needed to be reformed. But what did they do? Instead of taking a scalpel to it like they should have, they took a sledgehammer because they saw their opportunity to completely deconstruct our criminal justice system, and that's what they did. And now we're reaping the consequences of that. And we've seen crime go through the roof last year and this year. We have all the numbers to approve it by every public safety metric standard. This has been an unmitigated disaster. And it's even funny because our county judge, Lena Hidalgo, said at the State of the County Address in 2019 is that bail reform will make our communities safer. Now, she was either woefully unintelligent on the subject, or she just lied. And I don't know which one. I'm not calling her a liar. I'm just simply saying she was woefully ignorant on the topic. And now our community is suffering. There's a business right around the corner from here. It's called Blonde and Biscotti Coffee. If you haven't tried it, I recommend everybody go and try it.
Yeah. I know it.
That's a small business. They've been broken into 4 times in the last year.
Jeez.
4 times. And we're fairly certain it's the same guy because they've caught him a couple times while he's been doing it.
Yeah.
How do I go out to a business and tell them, hey, we're really going to help you out. We're going to take a report. And the guy that we catch a week later is going to get a PR bond. He's going to write back out and do it again. Or what do I tell the folks about Clayton Brown, who was a documented gang member who shot 3 different people, including a 15-year-old girl, and the DA's office cut him a deal and gave him deferred adjudication and dismissed 2 of his cases. By the way, he got back out and reoffended. And let's have a conversation about felons in possession of a firearm. We can all agree, convicted felons shouldn't have guns, right? That makes sense? So why is it that we have nearly 350 people in Harris County on deferred adjudication for felon in possession of a firearm? While we are having a national discussion on guns in this country and talking about how we need more gun laws and we need to make sure that people can't get guns, we're not even enforcing the laws that we have now. The very violent, vicious people that we are trying to keep guns out of their hands, they're giving them a slap on the wrist with probation and letting them right back out the door. It's ridiculous, and it's making our communities less safe, but nobody wants to have this conversation.
I do. Let's talk about guns real quick. Because I've talked to a lot of HPD about this, especially when the gun control debate was really front and center. And I was like, you know, if we had universal background checks, and people need to understand what universal means, it's not background checks. You always have to get a background check when you go buy a gun. Universal means, but what it is legal in Texas if we're friends and we trust each other. Like you can sell me a gun. That is legal. That drives the left crazy. They hate that. And I understand. At first glance, I kind of understand why, but at second glance, you're like, wait a second. That means I can't if especially in times like this, where I think the Second Amendment debate's over after everything that's happened for the last few weeks. But in times like this, it's like,
through the roof,
there's a lot of people that are like, I don't have a gun, and I'm scared now because the crime is up and people are, you know, out and about. There's riots and all this stuff. Can I borrow your gun? No, you can't. Well, in Texas you can.
Yeah.
In California, nope. In California, nope, you cannot. You're a felon if you do that because they do have state universal background checks. And so, but a criminal, of course, is going to just be like, yeah, here's your gun. And so my question to HPD was always, where are criminals getting the guns? Is it through these sort of like second, third hand dealers? Because they do exist. I want to acknowledge that they do exist. And like these guys will buy guns, they'll like rebuild them in cool ways, and then they'll sell them to people. It does happen. But are they selling them to the criminals, and is that how criminals are getting them, or are they breaking into places and getting them that way? Because I know of a gun store in Spring that's been broken into a huge number of times.
Yeah, let me tell you, no law that you could ever put in place is going to stop a criminal from getting a gun. So let's just like establish that right out the get-go.
Unless you could snap your fingers and disappear all guns.
Which is not realistic. It's never going to happen here.
Right.
So the reality is that they're not buying them at gun shows. Okay, they're not using the gun show loophole. They're not buying them from friends. They're stealing them from people. They're breaking into people's cars, and I think there was a story a while back about how burglary of motor vehicle was through the roof, and people were specifically targeting people that were going to gun shows or that were going to
the truck with the American flag on the back. It's like, that guy's got a
absolutely. That guy's got a gun. Let me break in and steal it. That's where they're getting it. But I think if you ask a police officer, how do you feel about gun laws, especially here in Houston, what we will say is, number one, we respect everybody's right to have a gun. We respect the Second Amendment. But we can't even have a conversation about increasing gun laws or making them more stringent if we're not even using the laws that we have now. If we are not throwing the book at every single person that sticks a gun in someone's face and robs them in this city, how can you legitimately have a conversation about having more laws or being stricter with different laws?
Right.
You're not enforcing the ones you have now. Now, if we were throwing the book at every single person that had a gun and every single person, maybe we'd be willing to have that conversation. Yeah. But we're a pragmatic group of people. We want to see that you're actually using the tools that you have in your toolbox before you want another tool.
I want to go back to what we actually put people in jail for a minute, because we talked about, the teenager with weed in his pocket. And there's the criminal justice supporters out there, and count me among them, but count me among the common sense ones, like, because I don't want to see somebody go to jail either for like these cases we're talking about. Like, well, you have some drugs on you. You're not, if you have 100 pounds and you're clearly intending to deal and sell these, maybe that's different, but just some drugs on you. Do I really think you should go to jail? Like, no, I think that's a perfectly reasonable conversation to have. The single mom who gets pulled over driving without a license, like, you know, these are very reasonable reforms that we could make. But the question is, there's this notion out there that our jails are jam packed with people who just got arrested on some minor drug charge. Is that really true?
No, that's not the reality. The jail is jam-packed with violent people that have actually had to do some jail time as a result. It's not jam-packed with minor offenses. They kind of move them through very, very quickly. They get PR bonds. But let me tell you just a little deal. We did a survey of our own members, and we asked them, would you prefer to not take someone to jail for marijuana and just cut them a ticket on the scene and let them go? Overwhelmingly, our own people support that. We support a more progressive policy than the current district attorney that is in Harris County and what the current laws are here in Texas, because we understand if somebody's got a little bit of marijuana, we don't want to take them. No police officer wants to take anybody to jail for a little bit of marijuana.
Yeah.
But we don't have the option to ignore it, and I think that's often lost in this conversation. We are just an arm of the executive branch. We have to enforce the laws that are on the books. We don't have the option to not enforce them. And I'm sure somebody will come back at me and say, well, Joe, y'all have discretion. You're absolutely right. We do have discretion. But that discretion was taken away when you gave us all body cameras, which we don't oppose body cameras. We support them. We think they're a great thing. But the minute that it's on body camera, that someone searches someone's pocket and finds a bag of marijuana, that's it. That officer cannot ignore it. If he does or she does, they will be fired.
And it's also true because people will still look at jail statistics and what they're in there for, and they'll be like, oh, like minor drug possession. But I've also, you look at that a little bit further, and it turns out that those are pleaded down from like a violent offense.
This literally happens all the time. You'll have someone who, let's say, gets arrested for aggravated robbery with a gun, and then by the time that it gets to his deal that he cuts, it was a minor assault charge. So it happens all the time. Our justice system, it's a very interesting animal because we demand transparency of our police officers, which is a good thing. But we don't demand the same transparency from our judges and our prosecutors. And I've always wondered why. Why aren't these deals made out in the public so that people can see? Why don't you talk about these types of things and make sure people understand, well, yeah, we did plea this down. And the reason why there's no transparency is because they don't want you to know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is they're giving away the farm over there on all these criminal justice deals.
Yeah, and the only accountability there is, well, we elect our judges in Texas, but the reality is it's difficult. We have like 75 people on the ballot, and it's difficult for voters to actually go through. Okay, what's your qualifications to be a judge, and what are you really going to do? Are you going to enforce the law? Because I still think the vast majority of people on all sides would basically agree with what we're saying about what should be enforced, what shouldn't, what kind of reforms need to be made, what shouldn't. But it unfortunately just gets totally lost in this conversation.
Yeah, I'm not even sure the general public knows everything that goes on in the criminal justice system. I think if we grabbed 5 people off the street on the corner here and said, hey, if I put a gun in your face and I robbed you and a police officer arrested me, how much time do you think I would get in jail? And I think most would tell you, I've had 20, 25 years. Nothing. Deferred adjudication. Probation, maybe 6 months, maybe.
Yeah.
The judge was having a bad day, the DA was having a bad day. But otherwise, they're getting right back out. And I don't think the public knows that. We've tried to do the best that we could to educate the public on what's really going on. And I think we can all agree, let's be soft on some minor crime that we can give people a second chance. Let's not ruin their lives because they had a suspended license or had 1 bag of weed. Let's work with those people. But the violent, gun-toting felons, the gang members, the shot callers, the ones that are out there doing these violent crimes, throw the book at them, and you will actually see a difference in violent crime within our city because you're actually disrupting the criminal element.
That's the thing, because really what this is about is there's a sentiment that, especially the black community and other minority populations, they have it worse. Their communities are crime-ridden. There's not enough investment there. The jobs, they feel forgotten. And I totally get that because, it's just true. But then we have to look at the reasons why. And I think what's obvious is, again, it's as obvious from their own community meetings, they want more police because you can't have investment into a community until it's safe. It's hard to have a good education when it's not safe. And like in all the education studies I've seen, there's a couple pretty prominent factors. It's safety in 2-parent households. That makes your education better, period. It's not much more complicated than that. We can throw money at it, but the reality is, and I know the way we do education funding in Texas is it is spread around. It's not just your property taxes. Counties that get less property tax input, well, they get additional money from the state, so it's spread more evenly. And some of the worst schools in America have some of the highest spending per capita per student. So, there's more to the story, but that just gets lost.
Well, I think, what you've seen, especially over the last few months, but what you've seen over the last 5 to 6 years is that everybody has attempted to scapegoat the police as the fault of all the ills of society. If things are going bad in a community, it must be because the police aren't doing enough. Or if they're over-policing the community, well, they're just targeting minorities. And everything has been heaped on us as if it's our fault for everything. But we're not the ones that are responsible for failing schools.
Yeah.
We're not the ones that are responsible if there's no job opportunities. We're simply there to try to provide the safest community that we can provide while also trying to bridge the gap and build a relationship. Yeah. But to touch on your point about who exactly is going to want to have a business in Seattle when this is all said and done?
Yeah.
Whenever they decide to tear down, whenever they decide to tear down CHOP or Chaz or whatever the hell they're calling it today. And of course, the mayor decide enough is enough. Who are they sending in to clear it out? They're going to send in the police officers. Mm-hmm. The very police officers that they want to disfund and dismantle, now they want them to go in and clean it up and take care of the situation, and just watch how this is going to play out. And you're going to think I'm clairvoyant when I say it. These folks are going to videotape the officers coming in there and arresting them. They're going to attack those police officers. The police officers are going to have to use force to try to clear this area out as they're being attacked. And then those police officers will be made out to be the bad guys. How dare they do this to these people after it was the mayor that's ordering them in there, after it was the mayor and that legislative over there, their council that decided to let this zone be taken over. And now you're going to ask the police officers to clean it up, and then you're going to hold us responsible if something goes wrong. It's completely ridiculous. They're setting us up for failure.
And so let's talk about holding the right police officers accountable. I mentioned numbers in the earlier on in this episode of how many complaints are actually leveled against you. It was like less than 300, and about 3 times as many complaints are from fellow cops. What happens to those complaints? There's lots of, you're head of a union, there's also a lot of talk about, unions are protecting bad cops. Yeah. What I've heard from a lot of cops is that can be true. It's usually not. A conversation worth having, but what's your take on it?
Yeah, so 2 million citizen contacts. We average that about every single year. We only had 276 citizens complain on us last year. 276. And as I told you, over 850, 3-to-1, officer on officer. And that could be something as minor as they didn't go to training or something as serious as excessive force. I will tell you this. There has been a lot of false narratives spread about police unions over the last couple weeks. Let's start with this one. There is, for whatever reason, people believe that we can somehow protect our officers from criminal prosecution. There is absolutely nothing in our contract whatsoever that says we are protected from a DA who wants to file charges on us, who demands a statement from police officers. There's nothing. This is just a made-up thing. There's a made-up talking point that they continue to expound over and over again. Let me tell you what our contract does do, what kind of protections it has for our officers. We all know that our officers are going to be tried in the court of public opinion. That's just the way it is. It's not going to change. Whether you are pro-police or anti-police, we can all agree they are going to be tried in the court of public opinion. And officers are and will continue to be fired when it is politically expedient for that police chief or that mayor or that council or whoever. That's going to happen. All our contract does is say they get one appeal to an arbitrator that is binding. So when you're really talking about, these protections are all they're going to do is protect bad cops. No, it gives a cop who has decided to put their life on the line and go out and protect their community one shot at an appeal when they are disciplined or when they're fired. And I believe that any reasonable person who would sit down and have this conversation with me would say, okay, I think that's fair, considering the climate we're in. But I'll do you one better. If you are a young person right now in your early 20s who just got out of college or you just got out of the military, you're going to look at police departments and say, am I going to get a fair shake if things go bad, even though I followed training, policy, and the law? Am I still going to be fired? And I think most people who are looking at that right now, educated people, are saying, I'm not going to get a fair shake. So I'm going to go to a department that at least has an appeal process, that I have the right to appeal. I mean, it's fundamental fairness that this country was built on, that you at least get to appeal a decision made by a politician in a hasty situation. Yeah. So that's really what we do. And another thing, too, this is such I know it's a talking point and it's a cliche, but it's the truth. Nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop because we are suffering for the actions of that idiot in Minneapolis. We're suffering. We've had 30 officers shot since that incident took place. We've had thousands assaulted. We've had dozens run over, including we had an officer right here that was run over by a car. She got thrown 7 feet. She showed up to work the next day, though, because that's the kind of commitment she has. But another officer who was hit with a brick in the face. He took 1 day off of work, and he got back out on the skirmish line. Once again, that's the kind of commitment that our officers have. But we're paying the price in violence against our officers and in officer deaths as a result of the actions of this guy in Minneapolis. So believe me, nobody wants to have bad cops around.
Yeah, no, and I believe that. Is it possible that like unions in other cities just do things differently? I mean, is this? I mean, because I've heard all the major cities are generally, I think, pretty well accounted for. Do you hear of other places that just aren't, need better training, need better resources? What is it?
I'll tell you this. We can certainly have the training conversation, and we're never going to be opposed to more training because we know that it's going to make better police officers, it's going to cause better outcomes. But, we've already had de-escalation training here for a while, but we'll continue to do that. And I think other major cities, we're on the ball. We are getting the training that we need. But, if you want to nationalize a training standard on de-escalation, so be it. Nationalized use of force standards, no problem. What you want to ban chokeholds? Fine, we understand. We haven't had chokeholds here in 40 years in Houston.
Really?
We understand.
I was going to ask about that because as a guy who kind of has some fighting background and we train all the time to subdue people as well. Again, very, very, we're not trying to arrest people in the SEAL teams. So it's a little different.
Slightly different environment.
Yeah, it's just different, which is why, I say your job is frankly harder. But I always wonder, I'm like, wow, in a bad fight, I don't like the idea of getting that one tool taken away from me, but it sounds like many major police forces here, LA, I think NYPD, I'm not sure. But I know LA and I know here, because you just told me, I've not had chokeholds forever. Yeah, and you seem to be doing fine.
It's been banned for quite some time. We could always still use it and still can in a lethal force encounter. The fight for your life that you described.
Okay, that's different.
It can still be used. But listen, we're listening to the community. I think nationwide, as I'm the national vice president of the FOP, we're listening to people. We want to make changes that people want to see that don't put undue risk on our police officers.
Right.
And I think that's a reform that we could all get behind and say, okay, we hear you. We don't want to have a bad outcome where someone uses a chokehold where maybe they shouldn't have and it was borderline. So we don't want to have that bad outcome. But as we move forward, we can't push the success over the horizon to where we can't ever reach it. And I think what you're seeing now is a lot of people that are very far left trying to push this narrative of an officer should never use force and there should never be a police shooting. But that's not the reality of our job. And I think you can certainly attest to this.
It's impossible.
The amount of force that we use is consistent with what we are getting from that suspect. And in 99.99% of the cases, the force used by the officer is only because that suspect was using force or that suspect was doing something to the officer. And until we start having a conversation, we can reform police officers all you want. But until we start talking about the behavior on the other side and really saying it's not appropriate, you cannot do that. You can't fight with a police officer when they're putting you under arrest. You can't shoot a taser at them. You can't throw a brick at them. All these other things, until those conversations start happening, and I'm not sure if we're ever going to have those conversations the way we're going, but we have to take into account the actions of the suspect in any use and force encounter with our police officers.
And another solution being thrown out there, or reform, is reform to qualified immunity. And so you've got a lot of thoughts on that. I'll just let you take it from there because I don't want to butcher even explaining qualified immunity. I think the layman's term or the layman's explanation of qualified immunity is basically it allows police officers to be sued personally as opposed to suing the city for infringing on your civil rights. The conversation is much more complicated than that, so I'll let you take it.
Yeah, let me just kind of give you some statistics on qualified immunity first because there's a lot of talk about it right now. the last 200 cases that have been held in lower courts on whether or not an officer should receive qualified immunity, the officer has only received it 57% of the time. So this blanket statement that no matter what, an officer is going to get qualified immunity is not true whatsoever. In fact, in egregious cases such as former Officer Chauvin, he's not going to get qualified immunity. And any officer that is outside their policy, training, and the law is not going to receive qualified immunity. The last 5 cases that have gone to the Supreme Court where they made a decision about whether or not someone would receive qualified immunity has been an 8-1 vote and a 9-0 vote. So there hasn't been a huge push prior to this about qualified immunity. And what police officers really want to know is, if I'm within policy, training, and the law, that I'm not going to be sued civilly. And I think that's a completely reasonable standard to have. And there's now talk of, hey, let's just do away with qualified immunity. Well, what does that look like if you just do away with qualified immunity? Number one, any police officer that can retire is going to retire. Any person that was thinking about becoming a police officer is not going to do it. And all of those who are in the field still and who still want to stick around, I can assure you they won't be doing a thing out on the street. Yeah. They will not want to be involved in any use of force encounter. They won't want to put anybody in jail, because what's going to happen as soon as that person gets out of jail? They're going to sue that police officer. Whether they had a reason to or not, they're simply going to go after their pockets. And the unintended consequences, too, is you're going to see many more lawsuits against the city and against the department and against the county or whoever your employer is, the state, because as much as people want to sue the police officer, they want to get to those deep pockets. So you're going to see a bunch more lawsuits if you were to do away with qualified immunity. It's not the devil in the room that everybody thinks it is. It's simply protection for a police officer when they're within policy, training, and the law. They are making split-second decisions, life and death decisions. And if they followed what they've always been trained, then they shouldn't be held civilly accountable for their actions.
Is there a way to reform the way it is? Because the argument I hear from the libertarian side, because this is kind of an interesting, somewhat bipartisan, meaning libertarians are big in favor of getting rid of qualified immunity and the left is in favor of getting rid of it. But is there common sense reforms? Because the way they explain it, and I'll probably screw this up even trying to explain it correctly, but essentially there has to be, they claim that for an officer to be held accountable because of a qualified immunity, you basically have to prove that this exact situation was found to be illegal in the same jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. And that seems kind of weird. That doesn't seem right. So is that a area for reform, or is that even true? What's your take?
I don't think it's as true as they say it is, such as that the exact same situation where we see qualified immunity not came into play is if you are outside your training, policy, and the law, then chances are you're not going to receive qualified immunity. Mm-hmm. And as I said earlier, under the scenario that you just brought up that libertarians are pushing, then why aren't officers getting qualified immunity 99% of the time?
Yeah.
Because it's so specific, as you said, to that exact case, that exact set of circumstances. So that may be their perception of it, but that is not the reality of how it's applied to the law, because the last 200 cases, about a little over half have received qualified immunity.
Yeah. So what about some other ones like no-knock warrants? Explain what those legally actually mean? Because I wonder if a lot of people, I think there's 2 different scenarios here that need to be talked about. One scenario is you bust through the door and you yell, police, police. Okay, so you've announced your presence. So you're not knocking, but you are announcing your presence. And then there's another scenario where you don't announce your presence. And I can see how that could be pretty problematic. So is that what they're like? What exactly are some of these reform-minded people talking about?
Yeah, so I think the perception of a no-knock warrant is you see a group of guys all dressed in black with with the big hammer on the door, and they hit it and you go right in. Mm-hmm. That's not really what happens in one of these no-knock warrants. What they normally do is they knock on the door, announce police, 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 then they hit the door. So it's that everybody in the house knows these are police officers that are coming in, and of course they're dressed in their uniform so everybody can see them. So on the issue of no-knock warrants, here's my thing. You have to have oversight over them, and you have to make sure that they're only used in the extreme cases that they need to be used for. I would advise people, don't take it completely out of the police officer's toolbox. Highly restrict it. And something that they did here in Houston is basically only the chief of police can authorize the no-knock warrant.
Because we had an issue with,
Absolutely.
Especially in Texas, because if you get the wrong, and we had this problem, a couple got killed, and and it was the wrong house, and they got killed because they defended themselves and they didn't realize it was police. And so it's, again, is the problem really the fact that they busted down the door, or the problem is that they didn't announce they were police? And so in Houston, we've made reforms to deal with that kind of issue.
Yeah, there have been reforms. I would just caution people, don't take it out completely out of the toolbox, but just highly restrict it. And just say only the highest level. I mean, heck, if you want the mayor to make the decision, whoever you want to put in charge of it, don't allow it to just be someone lower down the totem pole, somebody that needs to understand the risk. Yeah. And we also need to understand, is it that imperative to hit that door to stop whatever's on the other side? Yeah. And we have to make sure that
it's a tactical discussion at that point.
Exactly. And it's
but is there any scenario where we shouldn't announce that police, like that it should be silent? And that I can get behind, because I don't see any scenario where it's a good idea to not announce that it's cops coming in.
Yeah, I mean, listen, at some point they're going to have to know who's coming through the door. So, yeah, we need to announce ourselves so that they know, hey, these are police officers that are coming in. And some people may still decide to shoot it out, even when they know they're police officers.
Right.
But that's the reality
But
of the
it's
job.
more likely that they're not mistaken identities at that point. Yeah. And that makes sense, because there is a tactical consideration for being able to go straight through a door. Whether it's preservation of evidence or whether it's just avoiding a barricaded shooter in a long time shootout.
Well, you don't want to get that time for that guy to go post up in the back bedroom where he's got his arsenal. The
Take
idea
hostages,
is
all these things.
Catch them by surprise. But I think we also have to analyze whatever evidence is on the other side of the door. Is it worth the risk of not just the risk to the person that's in the house, but the risk to the police officers that are taking the door? Or is it maybe better that, we stop that guy down the road somewhere else, we get a search warrant for the house, or do something different?
What about the national registry that's being talked about? That one seems to be bipartisan, just ensuring that the bad cops aren't rehired. I guess the question there is, how do you define bad cops? I guess if they're fired from one precinct, I don't know. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I don't have a problem with the national registry of problem cops. The interesting thing about this is when this first thing got kicked off, you had the major city chiefs, who our chief is actually the head of, Chief Acevedo. They decided that they were going to blame all the ills of law enforcement on police unions, and they put out a statement, and if only we didn't have these unions, we would be able to take care of all the problems in law enforcement. And I literally laughed out loud at the statement, because police unions, we don't do background checks on people. We don't hire people. We don't train them. We don't set policy. We don't discipline. And we don't fire people. That's all under control of police chiefs. So if we have a problem with what we call gypsy police officers that are getting, I just made air quotes while I'm on a radio interview. I don't know why I did that.
It's a podcast, not a radio.
Sorry, podcast. I'm showing my age now. But if you're going to blame anybody for gypsy cops, it's the chief's fault, because they keep hiring people that they know have been fired from other places. So I think as long as there's a due process for that officer, so if they were fired and they can actually appeal their inclusion on that list, I think that's completely fair. And you just say, I'm sorry, you've been fired from 2 departments. You're not going to get hired by a third. It's
weird, like the legislation in Congress that we'll be voting on this week. I mean, we can't vote for it because it goes too far, but it was not as bad as I thought it would be. I think one of the problems with their national registry idea is that it says even if the claims were unsubstantiated or not proven, then it still counts. And it's like, well, that's not fair. And how many, that brings me to a different question about, you got 276 complaints. How many of those really resulted in any kind of punishment, or were they unsubstantiated? What kind of complaints are these? Like, how do we delve into that?
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the individual complaint, obviously, but there are numerous sustained complaints on our police officers, it could be even minor stuff or more serious stuff. I mean, I'll tell you that our officers sometimes feel like they get, in trouble too much, because, what they'll do in these investigations, and it's just so funny to be talking about this with regular people, is, let's say the complaint is for excessive force. They'll go in there and they'll find that there was no excessive force. But then we have this thing called conduct not alleged. And they'll go back and they'll look at that entire officer's call. And if you're not aware, we have a set of general orders that are about 900 pages long that our officers have to abide by. And you can't go one shift without breaking a general order. It's just not possible. But they'll go back in that body camera and they'll find that he didn't complete the report the right way, or he didn't click his seatbelt until after he'd pulled out of the parking lot, or he didn't turn on his body camera until he was already getting out of the car and he should have turned it on while he was still in the car. And our officers will get suspended for that. So even though the excessive force complaint was completely unfounded and they didn't do it, they're still going to get in trouble for something else. So I literally laugh when people say, well, you can't police your own and y'all just look out for one another. I'm like, are you kidding? We literally have people whose job it is to watch a video and every minute of it to see if you've committed a policy violation and then sustain discipline on you. But to your point about the sustained complaints, yeah, I think that could only be fair, that it has to be sustained. I mean, would we expect anyone to carry on their record, when they've been... when they beat a case in trial and the judge orders expungement, and we say, well, no, absolutely not. You need to keep that on your record. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. Speaking of things that are ridiculous, I remember you came out pretty hard against our county judge when she tried to enforce mask, or let's call them face coverings here in Harris County. I also came out pretty hard against it. Not because I'm against wearing face coverings. My campaign bought 50,000 of them, and we handed them out to the community. They play a role. The science is debatable, but whatever. They play a role. Let's go with it.
Yeah.
But it's quite another thing to say that if you don't play that role, you're going to get $1,000 fine, or I think 180 days in jail potentially. And your point was that how can you put us in that position to enforce such a nonsensical thing?
Yeah. So let me first say, we want everybody to wear a mask. I wear a mask when I'm out. Okay. Everybody wear the mask. But it was completely ridiculous for her to tell our officers that you are now going to have to enforce this draconian law. She literally wanted police officers going out on the streets and stopping people that didn't have masks on to give them $1,000 fine. They wanted us questioning parents that were walking with their kids at the park and ask, is your child over 11 years old? How come they don't have a mask on? We work so hard to build trust with our community, to build the bridge that everybody wants us to build. And you want to tear it down in an instant for this nonsensical law. If you want people to wear masks, here's an idea. Instead, have a public relations campaign, which, by the way, the mayor ended up doing after the fact. Yeah. Having a public relations campaign, having social media commercials done on the importance of wearing the mask. Treat people like adults instead of saying, hey, we're going to hammer you with this. So what I told our officers is, listen, we have to enforce laws that are lawful and legal. And the attorney general was saying, hey, these are actually a lawful legal action that she's given you. Fine. And we have discretion. You see someone not wearing a mask, either give them a mask or just give them a wave and say, hey, you might want to put a mask on. I was not going to have our officers be put in that position. And imagine a scenario like this where we're talking about relations between police officers in the black community and the brown community, that our officers are now going into that community and stopping every 17-year-old that doesn't have a mask on. Is that really going to look good for us? No, absolutely not. And I wasn't going to have our officers be put in that position.
Yeah, no, and then now they've changed it to let's go after small businesses, and they've taken away liquor licenses and all these things. And it's like, last time I checked, is it crowded? Are the people in there putting themselves at risk? Yeah, but they're putting themselves at risk. This is a choice. And I don't know how we forgot about basic civics lessons in America when talking about lockdowns and restrictions, and making things illegal that were not only legal 5 minutes ago, but encouraged. Right, because that's just what living is to go out and live, and we totally forgot about the issues of personal responsibility and basic freedom to engage in risk the way you see fit, and then it continues to baffle me.
Oh, isn't this great though? While these small businesses that are being strangled already from everything that has gone on with the COVID-19 pandemic, now we're threatening them with fines if they let people in that don't have a mask on. And now you're putting the business owner in a bad position who has to then tell people you can't come inside. This whole thing has just gotten so ridiculous, but you touched on it. At what point do we just say, you're responsible for yourself? Mm-hmm. You don't feel comfortable going out to the store? Well, then order groceries to your store. I mean, we're living in 2020 where you can literally get anything delivered to your door nowadays. And it's just gotten to a point, nobody's responsible for their own actions. And we're seeing that right now with everything that's going on. As I talked about earlier, we talk about the suspect's actions in case nobody's responsible for their actions anymore. It's the police's fault. It's somebody else's fault. Everybody needs to wake up a little bit, because it's my feeling that this country is it's turning upside down. We're toppling statues of George Washington. We're toppling statues of Teddy Roosevelt, for God's sakes. Everybody needs to take a breath and understand you are responsible for your own actions up to a certain point. Police officers are going to do the best job that they possibly can do, but at some point, this needs to stop. We need to have a civil and reasonable conversation about the issues that our country is experiencing right now, because it's out of control.
It needs to have stopped a long time ago. A lot of us have been pointing this out. This sort of now we're getting on a totally different topic outside policing, which is
That's all right.
The cultural topics. But personal responsibility and accountability, and this notion that you own your own destiny, is crucial to a free society. The society falls apart without it. I fundamentally believe that, and it's why I'm a conservative to the core, because we stand up for certain cultural values that we have to defend, and personal responsibility is one of those. If you remove that, well, you're telling somebody that somebody else is responsible for them, for the good and the bad, and that makes them a victim. It makes them somebody who doesn't control their own destiny, and that's not a good place to be psychologically. I think it leads to a lot of the anger, and I think it leads to a lot of the desire to kind of overthrow, symbols that have been labeled wrongly as oppressive or evil symbols, like George Washington. I mean, you want to have a reasonable conversation about Confederate monuments and whether those should be, I guess, placed in positions of prominence. I might have that conversation. Last time I checked, I'm part of the Union. Okay, the American flag and the Republican Party is the party of the Union. Mm-hmm. And so you're not going to get me to lose a lot of sleep over Confederate statues. The problem is we always knew it wouldn't end there, and warned this because this was really never about the Confederate statues. It was never about actual offensive symbols that really make your heart hurt. It was never about that. Maybe for some people it was, and we should grant them some empathy. And again, I totally understand the black community when they're like, this Confederate symbol means something to me. I get that. That's a different conversation. But the Marxists have totally revolutionized it, and they're using that grievance to now tear down everything that is American, because fundamentally they want a revolution. People need to understand, I think, what's really going on there.
Another thing, too, when you mention about personal responsibility, if you're not held accountable for your actions the first time you do something, what are you going to do? You're going to do it again.
To do it again. We're seeing that all over the country right now.
And
rising crime, yeah.
Of course. So when you're looking at some of these protesters,
they're testing the boundaries.
That's exactly what they're doing. They're continuing to push the envelope. And the more that cities back off, and the more the communities say, well, yeah, you can destroy that because you need to be provided a certain amount of space to blow off steam or whatever you want to say. I mean, for God's sakes, an editor at a Philadelphia newspaper got fired because he said buildings matter too, meaning we can't allow our communities to be burnt down. They fired him. They ran him off for saying that. It's completely ridiculous, because if you allow people to continue to do this, they're only going to become more emboldened. And whatever the next issue is, fill in the blank. Right now, it's police issues, police brutality. Next month, it'll be something else. And the month after, and until we get past the election, it'll continue to be a different issue. But they'll continue to get more violent. They will escalate. And it's no different than the individual criminal that I say you need to throw the book at. If you have protesters that turn into rioters, you need to throw the book at them. It's not what happened here in Houston. They let about 600 people go that had been arrested by our officers who were engaged in some of the violent protests. Mm-hmm. What kind of lesson have you taught them? I can do it again, and I can do even worse because there was no consequences. Yeah. And until we start to embrace the rule of law again in this country, it's going to get worse, folks. And I don't know how much clearer I need to be. If you don't tell people that what they're doing is wrong and there is no penalty, they will continue to push the envelope, and eventually they're going to come for you and your family.
Yeah, and they already have in many cases. And we got to stand up for it. I mean, I keep talking about this on social media. Hold the line. Like, enough is enough. It has to be done. And we got to petition our mayors and our governors who actually have the power to take action. Because I feel a little bit helpless. I'm a representative in Congress.
You can only do what you can do.
I don't have executive authority. I can only speak out, and people have, and I know there's a ton of silent majority. You don't have to go wave a sign, but you can call your mayor's office, and you can call your governor's office and ask them to do something about this. Because I know you're thinking it. I know you're out there thinking it.
And I know that the silent majority supports police officers. They love, respect, and they appreciate them. Our police officers are telling us on the street they haven't paid for a meal in weeks. Because when they go to a nice place to sit down and have lunch, the community's stepping up and buying it for them. And we appreciate it, and we love y'all. But, the congressman's right.
That keeps them going.
Send an email. Give a phone call. Something to say, do not tolerate this lawlessness in our community. Do not allow it to take hold. Because once it does, they're not going to stop. And what greater example do you need than what's going on in Seattle right now, where they took over a portion of the city, and then there's people getting murdered inside of there. There's been 2 murders there in the last couple days.
That's not all assaults, rapes.
Of course. I mean, everything's going on, and they won't even allow police officers to go. Imagine you're a business owner in that area, or you own a piece of property, or you, God forbid, just your apartment building happen to be in that area. And now you don't get any services from police officers because these folks have just decided to take over, and they don't have the political wherewithal to stand up to them and say, no, we're not going to allow this.
It's got to stop. It's got to stop. And that's probably a good place to end right there. That was phenomenal. Actually, but I wanted to ask you about broken window policing. That's a tactic that I've heard a lot about. Seems like, again, a very simple idea. Basically, if you want to clean up a block, first thing you do is you send in city services, take out the trash, make sure the graffiti's cleaned up off the walls, make sure the light bulbs work and the street lamps, the basics, right? And then engage that way. And that has huge effects, apparently. Is that something we do in Houston? Do we have enough resources to do it?
So I don't think that we do broken windows theory as much as we probably used to do. But we know that broken windows works. It's extremely successful in New York during the 90s and the early 2000s. But in order to do that, you need to make sure that the community is going to support what your plan is. Because a part of broken windows is not just cleaning up that neighborhood, replacing the light bulbs and windows and covering up graffiti. It means enforcing quality of life offenses almost to a point of zero tolerance, where if you're caught peeing in public, well, guess what? You're getting a ticket or you're going to jail. You're caught publicly intoxicated, you're going to jail. You're caught being a squeegee man when you're not supposed to, which is what they did in New York because they were harassing these poor people at red lights. Well, then you're getting a ticket, and when you don't pay that ticket, you're going to jail for the warrant. It will clean up a community, and you will see crime will go down because people realize crime is not going to be allowed here in this community. I can't do crime here. I need to go somewhere else. But you need to have the courage to want to do that. And you also have to have the community support, because you can't have a community member calling every time that somebody gets arrested on the block, because that's what you asked for. You wanted us to come in and you wanted to clean this up. Everybody wants police officers in their neighborhood to clean things up until it turns out that their cousin gets arrested for having a bag of marijuana on them.
Yeah, and that's the honest conversation we have to have. It's like what happened in Atlanta with I forget the name. His car was stopped in a Wendy's drive-thru. He was drunk and passed out, and the cops were called. And do you want the cops not to be called? What's the choice there?
Well, yeah. I mean, you call us out to this scene, which they were called out to. Now it's a driving while intoxicated. So as I brought up in another podcast with you, if we're called out there and that person is DWI, that officer does not have the ability to look the other way. They have a body camera on. They will be fired if they do this. So we heard afterwards some people say, well, why didn't they just let him walk off? Or why didn't they give him an Uber ride? Well, first of all, if you want us to give Uber rides to people that are DWI, go ahead and put a line item in the budget and say that's what you want us to do, and we will do it. We will send them off on an Uber ride instead of taking them to jail. But the officer does not have that option. They don't have the discretion to look the other way. So you've put us in this position where you've called us out there. We have to enforce the law. So our officers have to arrest that person. That person made a conscious decision to fight those police officers, to then run from them after he stole their taser, and then point the taser and shoot it at the officer, and then he was shot. At some point, we need to have a conversation. Number one, that shooting was justified by that officer. But number two, we have to have a conversation about that suspect's actions led to what occurred at the end of that.
Yeah, and if we don't want it to lead to that, we have to change the law.
Absolutely. If you don't want us to do anything about it, well, then just tell us. Tell the police officers what you want. We are an arm of the executive branch. We do not create laws. All we do is enforce the ones that are on the books, and our discretion has been removed by the advent of body cameras, which we support, but it does remove our discretion.
That's a fascinating discussion. I think we learned a lot from that. Joe, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.